The spotlight hit Johnny Cash's face at the exact moment he froze mid-song. It was April 19th, 1973, at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, and something in the crowd of 4,000 people had stopped the man in black cold. He was halfway through Folsom Prison Blues, a song he had performed thousands of times, when his fingers went still on the guitar strings. The band behind him, Luther Perkins on lead guitar, Marshall Grant on bass, W.S. Holland on drums, stumbled to a confused halt. 4,000 people held their breath, wondering if something had gone terribly wrong. But Johnny Cash wasn't having a heart attack or forgetting his lyrics. His eyes had locked onto a man in the third row, a man whose face he recognized but couldn't quite place. A man who was crying openly, tears streaming down weathered cheeks as he mouthed every single word of the song. "Hold on," Johnny said into the microphone, his deep voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Hold on just a minute." He set down his guitar and stepped to the edge of the stage, squinting past the lights. The man in the third row was thin, almost gaunt, with hollow eyes that had seen things most people only had nightmares about. He wore a faded military jacket, and on his chest, Johnny could now see a small pin, the distinctive design of a Purple Heart medal. "Sir," Johnny called out, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "were you in Vietnam?" The arena went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the wooden stage. The man nodded slowly, unable to speak. "Were you a prisoner of war?" Another nod. The man's whole body was shaking now. What Johnny Cash did next would become one of the most talked-about moments in country music history. He jumped off the stage, all 6 feet 2 inches of him in his black suit, and walked straight into the audience. Security guards rushed forward, but Johnny waved them off. He walked right up to that third row and stood in front of the crying veteran. "What's your name, son?" Johnny asked. "James," the man whispered. "James Mitchell, sir. I was held in the Hanoi Hilton for 5 years. The crowd gasped. The Hanoi Hilton, Hoalo prison, was notorious. It was where American prisoners of war had been tortured, starved, and broken. Senator John McCain had been held there. Commander Jeremiah Denton had been held there. And now, standing in front of Johnny Cash, was another survivor whose name the world didn't know. But here's the incredible part. Johnny Cash reached out and gripped both of James Mitchell's shoulders, and he said something that made grown men in that audience weep. "You know my music," Johnny said. It wasn't a question. James nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Your music kept me alive, sir, every single day for 5 years." Johnny Cash had heard many things in his career. He had been praised by presidents and criticized by preachers. He had sold millions of records and won countless awards. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what James Mitchell told him next. "We weren't allowed anything in those cells," James said, his voice growing stronger as years of silence broke open. "No books. No letters, no pictures of home, nothing, just concrete walls and darkness and the sounds of other men screaming. But I had your songs in my head. I sang them to myself every single day." James's voice cracked, but he kept going. The entire Opry was listening now, leaning forward to catch every word. "I would wake up and I would sing 'I Walk the Line' to myself. During interrogations, when they were hurting me, I would think about Ring of Fire and how you said love was a burning thing. At night, when I thought I couldn't survive another day, I would remember Folsom Prison Blues and think, if a man in prison could dream about freedom, then so could I." Johnny Cash stood there, this larger-than-life figure in black, and tears were running down his face too. His wife, June Carter Cash, was watching from backstage, and she would later say she had never seen her husband so moved, not even at the birth of their son. "There were 43 of us in my section of the prison," James continued. "We developed a tap code to communicate through the walls. And you know what we would tap to each other? The words to your songs. We would tap out, "I walk the line," letter by letter, word by word, just to remember that there was beauty somewhere in the world, just to remember that we were still human beings. The audience was openly weeping now. These weren't just country music fans. These were Americans who had watched the Vietnam War tear their nation apart, who had seen boys leave for war and come back broken or not come back at all. And here, in the middle of the Grand Ole Opry, they were witnessing something sacred. Johnny Cash pulled James Mitchell into a hug. This towering legend of country music, who had sung about outlaws and prisoners and the downtrodden, was holding a real prisoner who had survived the unthinkable. And he held him for a long time while 4,000 people watched in reverent silence. When Johnny finally stepped back, his voice was thick with emotion. "How many of you made it out?" he asked quietly. 21, James said. 22 of them didn't make it home." Johnny nodded slowly, processing this. Then he turned to face the crowd, still standing in the audience, still holding James's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone that someone had rushed to him, "this man right here is a hero, a real American hero, and he's telling me that my songs helped keep him alive through 5 years of hell. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever done anything in my whole life as important as that." The applause started then, a thunderous wave of sound that shook the rafters of the Grand Ole Opry. People rose to their feet, 4,000 of them standing and clapping and crying all at once. James Mitchell stood there, overwhelmed, as Johnny Cash kept his arm around the veteran's shoulders. But Johnny wasn't done. He motioned to the band to stay quiet and turned back to James. "Tell me something," Johnny said. "Which song meant the most to you over there?" James didn't hesitate. "Folsom Prison Blues. Because it reminded me that even in the darkest prison, a man could still have dreams, still have hope." Johnny Cash nodded. Then he looked up at the stage and called out to his band, "Boys, I'm going to finish this song, but I'm going to finish it right here, standing next to James Mitchell. And every word I sing is for him and for those 22 men who didn't make it home." What happened next became legendary. Johnny Cash stood in the middle of the audience and sang Folsom Prison Blues without his guitar, just his voice, and the band playing behind him. But he changed the words slightly, personalizing them for James. Instead of "I shot a man in Reno," he sang about being far from home. Instead of "That train keeps rolling," he sang about freedom finally coming. And James Mitchell sang with him. This broken veteran who had survived torture and isolation sang alongside Johnny Cash, his voice cracking and raw, but full of life. Other veterans in the audience stood up and sang too. Men who had served in World War II and Korea and Vietnam all rose to their feet and joined in this spontaneous, unrehearsed moment of healing. June Carter Cash would later say it was like watching a church service break out in the middle of a concert. W.S. Holland, who had been Johnny's drummer for decades, said he had never heard the song sound so powerful, so real, so necessary. When the song ended, Johnny helped James back to his seat, but not before making an announcement that shocked everyone. "James Mitchell is my guest for the rest of this tour," Johnny declared. "Every city we play, he's coming with us. And at every show, I'm going to tell his story, because America needs to remember what these men went through. America needs to honor what they survived." And Johnny Cash kept that promise. For the next 6 months, James Mitchell traveled with Johnny Cash and his band to 37 cities across America. At every single show, Johnny would call James up on stage and tell a version of this story. He would introduce James to tens of thousands of people, making sure this veteran who had been forgotten by his government was remembered by his country. But there's more to this story. Johnny Cash didn't just put James Mitchell on stage. He helped him get the medical care he needed for injuries sustained during torture. He connected James with other POW survivors, helping build a support network. He paid for James to go back to school, and he hired him to work on his ranch in Tennessee, giving him purpose and employment when other employers wouldn't hire a veteran with PTSD. Johnny Cash also started visiting VA hospitals regularly after meeting James. He would show up unannounced with his guitar and play for wounded veterans, taking requests, listening to their stories, treating them like the heroes they were. He did this for the rest of his life, refusing to let cameras document most of these visits. This wasn't about publicity. This was about debt. The debt Johnny felt to the men who had found hope in his music when they had nothing else. James Mitchell lived until 2007, passing away at the age of 64 from complications related to his time as a prisoner of war. But he lived 34 years longer than his captors thought he would. 34 years of freedom, family, and friendship with one of the greatest musicians America ever produced. At James's funeral, Johnny Cash's son, John Carter Cash, read a letter his father had written before his own death in 2003. In it, Johnny wrote, "James Mitchell taught me that music isn't just entertainment, it's survival, it's hope, it's proof that the human spirit cannot be broken no matter what evil tries to crush it. I wrote songs about prisoners and outlaws, but James showed me what it really means to be imprisoned and what it really takes to stay free inside." That letter hangs today in the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville, right next to James Mitchell's faded military jacket and the tap code chart that POWs used to communicate Johnny's lyrics through prison walls. The story of Johnny Cash and James Mitchell reminds us that art isn't separate from life, it is life, that a song can be more than entertainment, it can be a lifeline, it can be the difference between giving up and holding on for one more day. Johnny Cash sang about prisoners because he felt trapped by his own demons, addiction, depression, doubt, but his songs about imprisonment set other people free. They gave hope to a man in a concrete cell in Hanoi who sang, "I Walk the Line," to remember there was still beauty in the world. They reminded 43 American prisoners of war that they were still human beings with souls that couldn't be broken. What's your Johnny Cash? What song, what book, what piece of art has kept you going when everything else fell apart? Drop a comment below and share your story, because someone else might need to hear it. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share this video. James Mitchell's story deserves to be remembered. The power of music to save lives deserves to be celebrated. And Johnny Cash's legacy of compassion deserves to live on. What do you think Johnny Cash would say to veterans struggling today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.